Hello and welcome to another episode of Housing Matters. As always, I'm your host, Corey Jalseth. My guest today is State Representative April Connors, where we discuss the status of the rent control bill as it worked its way through the House, as well as concerns from bigger developers and other construction entities about how the rent control bill will have an effect on our state. Also, a legislative update. Where is the rent control bill at this moment? Take a listen. Representative April Connors, thank you so much for joining me on Housing Matters. I'd like to start the podcast out generally by having our guests tell our listeners a little bit about themselves, where they grew up, what do you do when you're not down here working hard in Olympia, and kind of what drove you to pursue elected office.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Tri-Cities, Washington, so Kennewick area, kind of a small town outside of Kennewick, where I was a ag girl. I was involved in Future Farmers America. I did a lot of fun things with, showing steers at the fair, doing public speaking contests, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Then went to WSU where I got a degree in communications. Yeah, go Cougs, exactly. And after that, spent most of my adult life in real estate. I worked for a huge commercial development operation out of California where we did high-rise concrete tilt-ups. I was their operations manager for quite a few years, and then when I moved back to Tri-Cities, I decided to become a residential real estate agent where I've been putting people into houses for the last 25 years. And my husband is on the school board, and he did that because we had some issues within the school, and we kind of did that put up or shut up. And so he ran for school board and got elected, and I helped him with his campaign. And then my girlfriend was complaining about the city, so now she's the mayor of Kennewick, and I helped her run and get elected in her campaign. And so as we continue to talk about Washington, and for me, a lot housing issues, when this 2 seats came open, the 8th legislative district, and they were open seats for state representative, and my friend and my husband said it's time for you to put up or shut up, and I've always been interested in politics my entire life, from the time when I was elected leaders in high school to being elected to the state house. So that's kind of what led me here, was encouraging others to get involved, and then them encouraging me to come into this role.
That's a cool roundabout way. So you were the ASB type person in high school, yeah.
ASB, state officer in FFA, National Leadership Counselor, those kinds of things in FFA. So spent time in Washington, D.C. in my youth, training other kids to be leaders. And so it's a natural progression to kind of do these kind of things.
Just out of curiosity, when you were at Wazoo, did you do the Greek community at all or anything?
I did not, but I was a writer for the Daily Evergreen.
Oh, excellent.
And was also a DJ at KUGR, as well as one of the local bars. So I was a communications, TV, radio, broadcasting major as well. I loved working for the Evergreen. I was a sports writer there. That's
wonderful. Daily Evergreen's still going strong. We'll get to the kind of housing-centric items a little later on, but you sit on the Appropriations Committee in the House, and for those who don't know what the Appropriations Committee is, it's kind of the checkbook for the House. So if a bill has a fiscal note or anything like that, it has to go through you guys. Would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about some of the bills you guys have been seeing this year?
Sure. Well, this is the state operating budget, what you said. So it's the largest budget for the state. It's the one that everyone's talking about. That is $15 billion in the hole. So this week, actually, the proposed budget by the House Democrats and the Senate Democrats just came out, and it's proposing adding up to $15 billion in new taxes, while also increasing the spending in Washington state by $5.1 billion. So there were some cuts that were happening within the budget, but then again, $5 billion in new spending. And so it's a little bit disconcerting for folks to see all of the things that are coming up in Washington right now, that what their prices are going to be increased from. We said it's going to be a tax on having fun in your life. There were taxes that we're seeing on liquor licenses. There's taxes that we're seeing on the Zen pouches. There's taxes on outdoor recreation, increasing the cost of the Discover Pass. There's taxes on hunting and fishing licenses. And then, of course, we do see some of the housing bills come through that will cost cities. We talked earlier before we came on the show about like House Bill 1380, which would let homeless people be able to sue cities for moving their encampments, which was a direct correlation to trying to fight a U.S. Supreme Court case in that matter. And so we see bills like that as well, because while that might not seem to have a fiscal note or an impact on the state budget, it has an impact on cities' budgets. And it was estimated it would cost the city millions of dollars, especially to implement the new policy, but also if they got into lawsuits and had to pay attorneys' fees and
cities having to cover all that.
They have to cover all the costs. So we see a variety of bills, from pension bills to housing bills to, like you said, pretty much anything with a fiscal note that's probably above $300,000. So we see quite a bit. Today we have an appropriations where they released the new budget potential, and over 300 people will be testifying so far today.
Well, that'll be a fun
So we'll be
hearing.
there for hours. Yeah.
The tax on fun thing too. We also have the highest. You talked about liquor licenses and all that. I always like to bring up to people we have the highest liquor tax in the entire country, and it's not even a close second. Oregon's second, and I think they're 8% below us or something like that. And so I just more leaning in towards your tax on fun.
And gas prices, like to go places. And there were a couple of bills, including trying to have our clean fuels go to a higher level, more clean fuel, that they believe will add somewhere around 20 cents a gallon to the price of gas, which was already, we're the third most expensive in the United States for gas as well, highest liquor prices. We're not going to be able to have any fun. We're not going to be able to go anywhere, afford our camping passes, anything like that. And so it is, it is a problem when we keep adding taxes. And you get into the wonky stuff of being on the appropriations committee where, I say they're deleting stuff, but they're adding $5 billion in new taxes, and then or $15 billion in new taxes, but $5 billion in new spending. But then you get into the wonky stuff of looking at the ending budget where they're going to have, it shows they should have a $6 billion surplus in 4 years. And I'm like, why would we add $15 billion in new taxes to have a $6 billion surplus? Why wouldn't we just try to balance the budget and come out as close as we can without taxing residents on everything?
Right.
And so it gets a little bit wonky there.
It seems like every time I leave the house with my 3 young kids, it's like anytime we leave the house, I breathe. That's $150 or whatever it is. And I always, my kind of big illustration I like to make is that the Space Needle is more expensive to go up into than the Eiffel Tower is, which just seems like kind of a wild thing for me. But given the world order of the Eiffel Tower, but it's tough.
And that's why so many people that are on the cusp of being on the border are folks in Walla Walla or folks in Spokane. They go, to Idaho or Oregon to get gas or liquor because of the price of those things in Washington State.
Well, our time at Washington State, or I lived in Spokane for a couple of years out of college as well, and that's exactly what I did. Let's make a run across the border for gas. What are some of the bills that you've sponsored this year that you are particularly excited about?
Sure. Well, the one I was really excited about that didn't make it out was I had a Homes for Heroes bill, which was a down payment assistance program for people that have a big impact in our community, like police officers, firefighters, nurses, things that we're lacking. Those people in our community as well. In Washington State, we're 51st in the nation. Adding Washington, D.C. is 51, to be the lowest police officers per capita in the United States. And so how do we recruit and retain these officers who we want to live in our communities? Same thing with nurses, firefighters. That bill was a priority for the new governor, Governor Ferguson. He gave it a shout out in his inaugural address. And unfortunately, that for the second time in a row has not made it out of the State House. And whether that is because the majority party just doesn't like that, or the majority party is having a little bit of difficulty with their new governor. Could be either or. Either of those two things. I also worked on a manufactured bill that I'm excited about this year that's going to provide some first-time homebuyer assistance, as well as for manufactured home communities that own a cooperative. It'll allow them to eliminate their titles. So think about a manufactured home if it's on a rented lot, is typically like owning a car or an RV.
Right.
It has a title that comes with it. And so on these cooperatively owned communities that we keep encouraging people to be able to buy their own communities in Washington State and have organizations helping do that, it allows people to eliminate their title on these communities to allow them to help do that. And then I've been doing a lot of work in the 16 and 17-year-old space. We talked about kids earlier.
Yeah.
I have 4 of them. Only one still in high school, but I did get into this job when I still had a couple in high school and noticed your kids are younger, but you will notice along the way that 16 and 17-year-old kids have a really hard time getting jobs in Washington State. And a lot of that is Labor and Industries is actually a rulemaking agency, so they're making rules. So it's not necessarily state law that's helping prohibit and make it harder for kids to get jobs, but the Department of Labor and Industries has caused a lot of that. So I've been working on that front a lot. I have 2 bills working through the State House to help with our kids that are involved in vocational technical education. And again, that started because I had 2 kids going to the skills centers and realized that we're doing thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of work for these kids and spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these skills centers, but they can't work till they get out of high school, and it's a problem, and we need to solve that because not every kid wants to play sports and not every kid wants to be in the arts.
Right.
Some kids get their drive and their self-worth from actually being employed and having a job and contributing to society. So.
Well, and help them get a little ahead too for future endeavors.
Or pay for gas.
Yeah, or pay for gas. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you've been to McDonald's. It's super expensive these days. And
It is.
so,
It is.
yeah.
I honestly, I don't even bother. I go to the grocery store and get like the pre-made meal that's real food, and I bring that home for the kids because it costs just as much as that's. Yeah, it's tough. So we all know a bill going through the House has to stop at the Rules Committee before it kind of comes up for a floor vote. Can you kind of walk our listeners through what that process looks like when something comes to rules? Sure.
Well, it has to come. So first, you have to have the chairman has to give the bill a hearing. So in the minority party, you don't even have to say if the bill gets a hearing or not. They get to decide. And so the chair will decide to give it a hearing. They will be heard in committee, and then once it's voted out of committee, before it can hit the House floor, it has to go through the Rules Committee. So the Rules Committee is a group of members on each side that are put together that actually pull bills to the House floor. So the Speaker of the House then decides which bills the Speaker would like on the Rules Committee. So again, there's that other, if the chair hears it, great, but then the Speaker actually has to want that bill to come to the House floor. So she'll put the bills on the rules pull list, and then as a member of the Rules Committee, you're usually allowed to pull 1 to 2 bills off of that list onto the House floor. So I get a lot of emails about that. As you know, I'm on the Rules Committee, so as soon as people know a rules pull is going to happen from the third House, our lobbying team to members are constantly asking, can you pull my bill to the floor? Can you pull my bill to the floor?
Yeah.
But again, it has to be available to us to pull by the Speaker in order to pull it there. So if there's something the Speaker does not like or does not want to pass,
Not an option.
it will not be an option to get it to the floor.
Okay. Getting more, staying in that same capacity a little bit, but kind of getting more into the rent control bill. You have, I think you're the only one who had the unique perspective of you sat on every committee that bill had to work through to get to the floor, the House Housing Committee, House Appropriations Committee, the Rules Committee, and then the floor. Can you kind of talk about working that bill all the way through and the changes that were made and all that kind of stuff?
Sure, and it's interesting you put in that perspective because I hadn't thought about that before. But yes, I did sit all the way through, and this is my 3rd year on the Housing Committee, as you might imagine, me being a real estate agent, plus all of my housing background and development. This has been where I've been most passionate and most effective in the House is on housing. We were able to stop that bill 2 years in a row by using different strategy, but every year you have to kind of determine what is the strategy to possibly stop it or how do you make something less bad. And in the House Housing Committee, it was very disappointing because we heard that bill on the first day of session. And when it came in on the first day of session, we were late because we were, pontificating and showing ourselves around on the House. We were doing pomp and circumstance, everything we were doing. And we got to the committee late that day. It was started late by the chair. And people weren't able to speak. The one thing I have to say, being on the Appropriations Committee, is typically the chair there will at least give everyone 1 minute to say their piece, and we'll get through that committee.
Extend the hearing if they need to.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's the last hearing of the day usually, so they will go over, like tonight, we'll probably be there till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. But this one was cut short. No one from the general public was able to speak. There were selected panels. And so it was very disappointing for a lot of housing providers who came to tell their stories that weren't.
We had some members come from Yakima, Spokane, Ellensburg. Yeah.
And weren't able to tell their stories. So it was very disappointing in there. Of course, it was voted out of the housing committee. It came to the appropriations committee. Typically, we'll come there as a stop because there was a model policy that was being developed, model ordinances or model rental agreements that were being adopted for people to be able to use, which is actually fairly important so someone doesn't get sued. And I believe, if I were correct, when it came to the floor, that piece was taken out.
It was, yes, yeah.
And so, but those are important pieces because you have a lot of people that you have bigger corporations that do housing, but then you also have small landlords that use, mom and pop. People call them mom and pops, but people that are using it as part of their living and how that they've built up a small portfolio and trying to get by with that portfolio, and they don't have some of the resources that larger groups do to put together model policy and model rental agreements. As laws in Washington State change all the time.
They can become RHA members. I'll plug us right here.
Yeah.
Become RHA members. Use our forums. Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll have forums that help them. But a lot of people might not have that ability. And so you guys will be now just establishing forums should this bill go into effect. And then, of course, heard the bill again on the House floor, which not only, I guess you can almost give it a forced stop for me because I'm also the floor leader. So I do all of the strategy for how we're going to fight bills on the floor, what we're going to do to talk about them, who speakers are going to be, and how that plays out with amendments and everything else on the floor. So you might have saw on the floor, if you watched, that there was a weird move that I actually did on the floor, which doesn't happen very often. It happened once the session before, but I made a motion on the floor, which you rarely see in the State House, to send the bill back to committee.
I did see that. Yes, yeah.
And the reason I made that motion was exactly from what I set through on the first day of the committee, where no one got to talk. Move to recommit House Bill 1217 to the Housing Committee with instructions for all persons who sign in to testify to have at least 1 minute each. And so I made the motion to send it back to committee to let people have a voice in the process, which was denied by the majority party, but that was something different that we don't see happen very often.
Yeah, Representative Dufost kind of added with you on that because he was the one who was very, very passionate during on that hearing day. Yeah, so yeah.
Correct. So so we did that, which was different, and then watched it. The bill changed at each level. Representative Macri, who was on appropriations, did a striker on appropriations, and then did another striker on the House floor that took out a lot of things that a lot of housing providers were worried about, but still kept, obviously, the rent cap, which is something that I'm, of course, very, very concerned about, especially being in real estate. But also, I've represented many developers. I sell a lot of land. I dabble some in commercial sales as well. So I'm concerned about what it's going to do to the state of Washington there.
Yeah, you spoke on the floor, and I think your direct quote, if I have it correct, was self-inflicted economic wound.
It's a self-inflicted economic wound. Vote no.
Which I thought was great. I've been stealing that line, just so you know. I've been peddling it around. But you spoke about developers that you had talked with that are moving their operations to other states. I think you mentioned Idaho and Arizona. So you've been hearing that though pretty frequently.
Really frequently.
Yeah.
And I know our House minority leader, he said, you gave the speech on the floor and you said, this is a great bill. And he goes, and you did this really long pause and it made me super nervous because I wasn't sure what you were going to say. This is a great bill. It's a great bill for Idaho. It's a great bill for Montana. And it's a great bill for Arizona. And then he goes as a attorney, he said, you never pause that long. So someone would pipe in. I'm like, well, I had the floor. And I said, it's a great bill for Idaho, a great bill for Montana, a great bill for Arizona, because that's exactly, with even a hint of this bill, this is where our developers are going. And because they don't have the restrictions of rent control, but they also don't have all of the restrictions in development that we have in Washington State, from environmental process to permitting process to all of the state building code council things that are put on our builders, as well as taxes. And, B&O taxes are there's a proposal to push those up this year too.
Yep.
And so, no, I have grave concerns. And, I am still an active real estate agent. So when we leave here and I go back, I have a team that is taking care of my business right now. But when I go back, I'm an active real estate agent. And we've already had one of our amazing clients who owns probably 6 or 7 rental units in Tri-Cities that are ones that are affordable to families. We're talking $1,200 to $1,400 a month. And guess what they're doing?
They're selling them.
They're selling them.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because these are single-family homes that have been able to provide families with a great spot in communities that are close to schools, close to parks, and they're going to be selling those. And some people might say, well, that's okay because there's still houses. They're still out there. But no, those will go into the home ownership market and take away for people who are trying to save money to either buy a home or just put a roof over their families' heads. So,
sure. And, owner occupied is a good thing, but like you said, and I guess I could illustrate with Seattle a little bit, but, if somebody bought the house 30 years ago for, I don't know, $200,000, let's say, but then somebody comes in to buy it now and they're, they have a good down payment, but their mortgage is $800,000 or whatever. There's no way that can be an affordable rental. It's just not going to be there.
Well, no. And then with other taxes that are being considered this legislative session, while homeownership has always been the American dream, you have to start worrying too about tax bills. In Tri-Cities, and personally, mine have gone up by 25% over the last 3 years, and that's added $380 to $400 to my mortgage payment in the last 3 to 4 years. And so there's a bill out there that we're, of course, hearing as part of the tax package that would take the local rate from 1% to 3% as an increase, which could, price people out of their homes, especially folks that are, on the margin of if they could own a home, as well as our elderly that struggle with paying on a fixed income, paying their taxes.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong. They ran the property tax increase as its own independent venture for a bill, but now they've rolled it into their budget proposal.
Yes, so it's in the budget proposal, but it still has to pass as a bill. So you will see in the last 2 weeks, you'll see a lot of bills that came up. Some of them to delete, like there was one to delete. There's like a leadership group for high school students that they're deleting that will save the state like $1.5 million a year. So you'll see kind of their version of government cuts that come in in the form of a bill. So they have to be in a bill form to be able to take them out of the budget. So you'll see the wealth tax, which people keep talking about. In the Senate, there was kind of a head tax that was on the jumpstart tax on wealthy people that are doing really good in their jobs. So they get a raise, and then they're going to get another 5% tax on top of that because they're succeeding in their job. So you'll see all of those actually as individual bills as well.
And I haven't had a chance to dive into the budget specifically, but do you know if they've happened to roll in any of the proposed cuts from the governor? As you said, there's been a little bit of kind of push and shove there a little bit, and I haven't had a chance to read it myself if they've rolled in any of his proposed cuts that he discussed. I guess that was about a month ago.
Yeah, well, and it's hundreds and hundreds of pages long. So we had a high-level overview yesterday because it just came out at 12:30 yesterday. A high-level overview. Yes, there are cuts that were in there, especially from Inslee's first and second pass budgets. So we started with Governor Inslee's budget, and then Governor Ferguson came in, and then he gave some proposed cuts as well. But I noticed that they did not include any of the furloughs, which people were very worried about. So the furloughs were not included I believe, in the House or the Senate budget for people to have to take a day of work off a month if you're in a state agency.
Yeah. So talking a little bit more about housing-centric issues in the state, aside from rent control and the issues that would lead to. We know that there's an affordability issue, and some of the bills that were discussed in the House Housing Committee. We had the tenant assistance program, and another bill that I believe just had a hearing in the Senate was about harmonization of all the statewide laws, and instead of housing providers having to work with a patchwork of laws based on the jurisdiction where their rentals are, It would have made kind of a supreme law of the land, so to speak. Can you talk about those a little bit?
Sure. Well, we put out the House Republicans put out a suite of bills that would have helped housing in Washington State. From I had a permitting bill. I had a urban growth boundary bill to try to allow. If you think you're going down a street and one side of the street has houses and the other side's vacant land, if there's infrastructure running down the street, that we'd be able to expand to the other side of the street just for housing. Since we're in such a housing crisis, we had the tenant assistance program, which would have been a hand up until we had more supply into the market to help stabilize the price of what people were be able to afford, like give them a little bit of a hand up to be able to afford their rent right now. We've had bills that try to deal with the state building code council because they keep putting additional regulations on builders that keep driving up the cost of homes. And then, like you said, like trying to make it so that the state has not so many laws like in different cities. Like it's been a problem. Like if you think about, just for me in the Tri-Cities, I live in Kennewick, but Pasco and Richland there's no like defined border except for the river, I guess. But they're still like kind of one big city. And so if Pasco and Richland and Kennewick have different laws, it's really hard to, if you own a property in one of those jurisdictions or West Richland or anywhere close by, for them to have different laws, it's really hard for people to be able to keep up. So having one, law superseding the state I think is a better idea but I do believe that there should be some local control as far as what you want to build and where you want to do it. And timelines, but having one superseding kind of the rental piece and the landlord-tenant law would be good, especially on evictions and reform and those kinds of things.
That was another bill I was going to bring up was the eviction reform tenant safety aspect, because what we're hearing from a lot of housing providers, big and small, is the lengthy process of removing residents who are a danger or nuisance at the least to other residents, and the big issues that they're having with that and safety, especially in some of the bigger apartment buildings and things like that.
Yes, Representative Barkas had a RLTA reform bill and another one, kind of a task force to look at what the problems are to fix it. And unfortunately, the chair of the House Housing Committee would not hear those bills, which is unfortunate because housing providers are leaving for those reasons as well as people not feeling safe. I actually had a bill that was it was in the grand scheme of things, it wouldn't have done as much as his RLTA, but it would have hopefully provided some protection for people who were delivering notices. We've seen a lot of people being injured or hurt or even shot, delivering notices for people to leave. And this bill would have allowed them not to have to deliver in person, like just put it on the door in a conspicuous space so they could so that they could see it. And that did not get a hearing either. And so there's a lot of things that we're working on behind the scenes that we'll continue to have conversations with the Democrats to see if we can push forward. But unfortunately, right now, they are not willing to hear some of the bills that we think will affect housing prices as well as rental rates, as well as eviction reform to move our market forward.
Yeah. And something that is still included in the rent control bill, as we're talking about all these different policies in different jurisdictions, is the language for action by the Attorney General's office for housing provider if they happen to. I'm glad that there is a chance to cure now instead, because the initial bill, the language was written so that it basically assumed ill intent by the housing provider, and then there was a Consumer Protection Act violation possibility. So I'm glad those changes were able to be made, but that still, I think, is a concern given, that they'd have to come out of pocket for up to 3 months rent and attorney's fees and all that, given the fact that a lot of the local jurisdictions would still be able to have a lot of their own policies.
Yeah. Correct. And that in the Consumer Protection Act, I was happy to see that piece come out because that seems to be added to everything lately. So, and private right of actions all the time. And I didn't see that in this particular bill, but the private right of action seems to be adding itself to every single bill in Washington State, which is going to significantly drive out people who want to be business owners and businesses in Washington State.
Absolutely. We see that on local policy a lot, passed by various city councils. We have a few cities the last couple of years. The private right of action is a big And it's always kind of tucked right at the end where you think maybe you're going to miss it. And then, there it is.
There it is.
Yeah.
It's right there. Yeah.
Representative April Connors, thank you so much for joining me on Housing Matters. It was a pleasure speaking with you. And thank you for taking the time during an extremely busy session and a busy time of year for you.
Yeah. Always happy to talk housing. It's like I said, it's what I do and what I love. And so I wouldn't be doing it for the last, gosh, if you add in my development experience, over 30 plus years in the housing industry.
If you didn't enjoy it, I
wouldn't still be here. I wouldn't be doing it here, that's for sure.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
But there's one thing that I certainly want to flag for the committee and for the public at large is we're moving towards a certain conflict, one that I am worried about, and I wanted to put it on your radar, is we're looking today at capping the amount that rents can increase year over year. And simultaneously, we have another policy that's not in this committee, but it needs to be in consideration because it's all part of the housing universe. We have another policy that is coming before the legislature that would remove the cap at which property taxes can be increased year over year. As we're considering this policy and others, I think it is certainly worthy of consideration that we understand the entire universe of what's happening regarding housing policy, where we are capping rents, but we are removing the cap at which, or proposing to remove the cap at which property taxes can increase. And I tell you that I have a real fear for our housing market at large over time, should both of those policies come to fruition. So thank you.
That was State Senator Chris Gildon speaking about engrossed House Bill 1217, otherwise known as the Rent Control Bill. His argument being that while we are trying to cap rents, we are trying to uncap many of the other expenses experienced by small housing providers. Now that the bill has been execed out of the Senate Housing Committee, it moves on to the Senate Ways and Means Committee. The Senate Ways and Means Committee, much like the House Appropriations Committee, is the checkbook of the Senate, where any bill with a fiscal note has to make a stop before going to the floor for a vote. If the bill passes out of the Ways and Means Committee, it will have to go to the Senate Rules Committee and then is eligible to come to the Senate floor for a vote. The only substantive change made on the bill in the Senate Housing Committee is that the rent cap for mobile home and manufactured housing has dropped from 7% a year to 5% a year. We will keep all of our membership appraised of any changes that come with this bill as it moves its way through the Senate. Well, thank you everybody for joining me for another episode of Housing Matters. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Representative April Connors. Stick with RHA for any legislative updates coming out of Olympia with regards to the rent control bill. Keep an eye on your inboxes and keep an eye on RHA social media. If you have a story or topic you believe should be covered on a future episode of Housing Matters, send me an email at chjalseth@rhawa.org. I'd be happy to hear from you. The views expressed in episodes of RHAWA's Housing Matters podcast do not necessarily represent the views and policies of the Rental Housing Association of Washington. Formal legal advice and review is recommended prior to selection and use of this information. RHAWA does not represent your selection or execution of this information as appropriate for your specific circumstance. The material contained and represented herein, although obtained from reliable sources, is not considered legal advice or to be used as a substitution for legal counsel. Copyright 2025.